When a 13-year-old girl walked in holding a shattered helmet, no one expected what she said next. "Please don't fix it," she whispered. "It broke saving my dad." When 13-year-old Mara walked into the motorcycle repair shop at the edge of the industrial district, everything stopped. It wasn't dramatic at first. No crash, no raised voices. Just a pause so complete it felt like the air itself had stalled. A wrench froze mid-turn. A radio murmured on, forgotten. The low, familiar rhythm of the place metal against metal. Engines cooling, boots shifting on concrete fell out of sync. The bell above the door rang once. Then, almost apologetic. Mara stood just inside the threshold, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. The door swung shut behind her with a soft clang that echoed louder than it should have. She was small for the space, swallowed by it immediately. Oil-stained floors, steel walls, motorcycles land like heavy animals resting between fights. The shop smelled of burnt oil and hot rubber, and something sharp she couldn't name. A smear of dried blood darkened the cuff of her sleeve. It wasn't fresh enough to alarm anyone right away, but old enough to tell a story no one wanted to guess at. Her jacket hung crooked on her shoulders, one sleeve pushed up slightly, as if she'd tried to hide the mark and failed. In her hands, she carried a motorcycle helmet. It was cracked clean through the crown, not a surface scratch, a true break, the kind that comes from impact, from force that doesn't ask permission. One strap was snapped, hanging loose and useless, frayed at the end like a tendon torn away from bone. The helmet had weight to it, history, the kind of damage that couldn't be buffed out. Mara held it close, fingers digging into the rim as though it might slip away if she loosened her grip around her. The men stared, not openly hostile, not welcoming either, just still, watching, measuring. This was not a place people wandered into by accident, and certainly not a place children came alone. Kids belonged in classrooms, on sidewalks, in noise and light. Not here, among scarred machines and men who had learned to take up space. She swallowed. Her hands trembled. Her voice didn't. "Please don't throw this away," she said. The words landed softly, but they landed. "I know it's broken," she continued, forcing herself to lift her eyes. They were steady in a way that didn't match her age, or her hands, or the dry blood on her sleeve. "But it's all I have left of my dad." The sentence didn't demand anything. It didn't accuse. It didn't beg. It just existed. For a moment, no one spoke. The radio crackled, then fell quiet as if someone had turned it down without realizing. The shop seemed to lean inward, listening. Mara stood there, breathing carefully, like someone who had learned how quickly the wrong movement could make things worse. She didn't explain, didn't say how it broke, didn't say when, didn't say why she was here instead of somewhere safer, somewhere softer. She only tightened her grip on the helmet, pressing it lightly against her chest, as though that was where it belonged. One of the men shifted his weight. Another glanced toward the door, then away. Someone cleared their throat and thought better of speaking. Mara waited. She had learned patience early, the kind that comes from knowing adults don't always answer right away, or at all. No one in the room knew it yet, but the shape of the afternoon had already changed. The rules of the place, the unspoken ones about who belonged and who didn't, were quietly breaking apart, all because a girl walked in holding something broken and asked that it not be discarded. That sentence, soft, careful, impossibly heavy, was the moment everything began to change. This was a place where nothing sentimental survived. The motorcycle repair shop had been stripped down to function long ago. Anything that didn't earn its space had been discarded: photos, decorations, softness of any kind. The walls were bare except for racks of tools arranged with ruthless precision. Steel met steel. Concrete bore the weight of decades. The air itself felt used, heavy with the scent of burnt oil, hot rubber, and metal shavings that glittered faintly under the lights. A radio murmured somewhere near the back, low enough to be ignored but never silenced. Its voice blended with the sounds of work, the clink of tools being set down, the hiss of cooling engines, the occasional scrape of a boot against the floor. 6 motorcycles stood in a rough line across the shop, space just enough to allow movement between them. They looked like resting animals, massive, scarred, still carrying the warmth of recent rides. Chrome dulled by use, paint chipped, engines ticking softly as they cooled, each click marking time. There were 9 bikers in the shop that afternoon. They occupied the space without crowding it, each man aware of where he stood, what he blocked, what he guarded. Leather vests hung heavy on their frames, worn thin at the edges, patches stitched and restitched over the years. Hands were rough, knuckles scarred. nails permanently darkened no matter how often they were scrubbed. These were men who understood weight of machines, of silence, of consequences. At the center of it all stood Rook. He didn't stand taller than the others by much, but the room seemed to orient itself around him anyway, broad-shouldered, gray threaded through his hair at the temples, not from age alone, but from long familiarity with watchfulness. His eyes were sharp, practiced eyes that had learned to measure a situation before deciding whether it was a threat, a nuisance, or something worse. His vest bore patches that hadn't been bought or gifted. They had been earned, the hard way, the kind of history that didn't invite questions. Around him were men who had learned early that softness was a liability, not because they lacked it, but because the world had taught them what it cost. They spoke sparingly. When they moved, it was with purpose. Even at rest, there was a coiled alertness to them, like engines that never fully shut off. And then there was Mara. She didn't belong here. Every line of the room said so. Kids didn't come to places like this. Not alone. Not ever. Children brought noise, uncertainty, rules. They belonged in places that smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria food. Not oil and heat and steel. Especially not kids who clutched broken things like lifelines. Mara stood just inside the shop, small against the scale of it all. The cracked helmet in her arms looked heavier now, its damage more pronounced under the harsh overhead lights. The snap strap swung slightly as she shifted her weight. The soft movement, the only sign she was breathing at all. No one moved, not toward her, not away. Suspicion settled in the room like dust, invisible but thick, coating every thought. A few of the men watched her openly. Others pretended not to. One leaned back against a workbench, arms crossed, jaw set. Another glanced at Rook, waiting, measuring his reaction the way they measured everything. The shop held its breath. This was unfamiliar territory, not danger, not yet, but disruption. An interruption that didn't announce itself loudly, that didn't come with threats or demands. Just a girl, standing in a place that had no room for her, holding something broken and asking without saying it for it not to be dismissed. No one spoke, and in that silence, the rules of the place began to strain, subtle fractures forming beneath the surface, because whatever happened next would say exactly what kind of men they were. Rook noticed the bruise before anyone else did. It wasn't fresh enough to draw immediate attention, not the kind that demanded action on sight. The yellowing at the edges told its own quiet story, days old, maybe more, old enough to be explained away, old enough to have been lived with. Makeup had been layered over it, but not carefully. The color was off by a shade, the coverage uneven. Something done in a hurry, something done by someone who hadn't had time to practice hiding pain. Rook's eyes flicked to it once, then away. He didn't react, didn't signal to the others, didn't change his posture, but the room shifted subtly around him, responding to something unspoken. He took a step closer, not into her space, not enough to make her retreat, just enough that she knew she was being seen. He didn't raise his voice, didn't crowd her. "Who did that to you?" he asked. The question hung there, simple and unadorned. No accusation, no sympathy, just words offered neutrally, as if the answer could be anything at all. Mara shrugged. It was a practice movement, small, economical, the kind of shrug kids learn when explanations have cost them more than silence ever did. Her shoulders lifted and fell as if the question had missed its mark entirely. "It's nothing." She didn't look up when she said it. Rook didn't respond. He didn't press, didn't contradict her, didn't tell her it was obviously something. He just waited, still as the bikes behind him, still as the air that had gone heavy again. Waiting was something he was good at. Mara's eyes dropped to the helmet in her hands. She turned it slightly without realizing she was doing it, thumb tracing the crack that split the crown straight through. The break was clean, decisive, the kind that came from force moving faster than thought. "He was wearing it," she said. The words slipped out sideways, like they hadn't been meant for anyone else to hear. Rook stayed quiet. When the truck ran a light, she added. Her voice wavered, just once. A tiny hitch she smoothed over immediately, jaw tightening as if to keep the rest contained. The room felt smaller now, closer. Even the men who had looked away earlier were listening. They said it saved his head. Mara continued. She paused, swallowing. That if he hadn't had it on, it would have been worse. Her fingers tightened around the rim of the helmet, but his chest. She stopped. Breathe in, then out. The pause wasn't dramatic. It wasn't for effect. It was practical, necessary, the kind of pause taken by someone who knew if she didn't stop herself, She might not be able to start again. Mom sold everything after, she said, quieter now. The car, the TV, stuff that wasn't nailed down. Rent's late. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. School says I need a parent's signature for the forms. Field trips, emergency contacts. Her mouth twisted slightly, as if the words tasted wrong. Today was his birthday. That one landed differently, softer, heavier. Mara lifted the helmet just enough to rest her forehead against it. The cracked surface was cool, solid. She closed her eyes for a second, not long enough to be called a breakdown, just long enough to lean. I just didn't want it thrown away, she said. The sentence came out almost apologetic, not for the helmet, for needing it. The shop was silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried weight, understanding, something irreversible. No one interrupted it. No one filled the space with reassurance or questions or noise. Rook stayed where he was. He didn't reach for her, didn't tell her everything would be okay, but he didn't look away either. And in that quiet, the truth finished settling into the room, no longer hidden, no longer denied, and impossible to ignore. The first objection came from the back of the room. We can't keep her here. It wasn't said loudly. It didn't need to be. The words carried the weight of habit, of rules learned through experience. Places like this survived by knowing where their lines were and by not crossing them. Another voice followed, quieter still, almost careful. This isn't our problem. The sentence hung there, unchallenged. For a moment, it even sounded reasonable. Rook didn't answer. He didn't turn toward the voices or shut them down. He didn't nod in agreement either. He simply stayed where he was, eyes on Mara, giving the room time to sit with what had been said. Time was useful like that. It exposed things, forced people to hear themselves. Then he nodded once. Small and precise. Eli understood immediately. He moved without urgency, reaching for a clean rag from the shelf by the sink, the kind kept separate from the ones used on engines. He filled a bottle with water, capped it, and brought both over. No announcement, no eye contact with the others. Just action. Another chair scraped softly across the concrete as someone slid it forward, stopping at a careful distance from Mara, close enough to be an invitation, far enough not to crowd her. A leather jacket appeared next, thick, worn, carrying the scent of smoke and road. It was draped over her shoulders with a kind of awkward gentleness, the sleeves hanging past her hands. The heavy. Mara stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed. No one asked her permission. No one asked if she wanted help. They simply offered it, quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The objections didn't come again. Rook moved then. He stepped closer, but not in front of her, not looming. He lowered himself until they were eye level, the floor creaking softly beneath his weight. From here, the shop looked different, less towering, less oppressive. He made sure she saw his hands, open, empty. The helmet rested between them. This helmet, Rook said, his voice calm, steady, was built to protect. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. It did its job. The words weren't poetic. They weren't meant to comfort. They were simply true. And somehow that made them land harder. Mara watched him closely, searching his face for something she'd learned not to expect. A catch, a condition, an ending. Rook straightened slowly and turned his gaze outward, taking in the room. The man who had spoken earlier didn't look away. Neither did he. This isn't about rules anymore, he said. The radio clicked off somewhere behind him. No one admitted to touching it. It's about what kind of men we're going to be. He let the sentence settle, didn't rush to fill the silence. The shop had always been good at silence. It knew how to hold weight. No one argued, not because they were ordered to be quiet, not because they were afraid of him, but because the decision had already been made, piece by piece, in the small acts that had happened without discussion. The water, the chair, the jacket. This wasn't a vote. It was recognition. Mara sat wrapped in borrowed warmth, the helmet still in her lap. For the first time since she'd walked in, her hands stopped shaking. The rules of the place didn't vanish. They shifted, bent, made room for something else. And in that subtle, collective adjustment marked, uncelebrated, the room changed its mind, not loudly. Permanently. The next week, rumors started. They didn't arrive all at once. They moved the way rumors always do, sideways, half-formed, carried in lowered voices and unfinished sentences. At first, it was just curiosity, questions that didn't quite know how to phrase themselves. At merit school, teachers noticed things before anyone named them. A girl being called to the office without the usual tightening of shoulders. A principal who stopped rushing through meetings. A secretary who closed the door instead of leaving it ajar. Students noticed too. They noticed the men who walked Mara to the office one morning. Not inside, not past the front desk, just to the hallway, where they waited without leaning, without looming. Leather vests, heavy boots, hands visible, calm, still, not threatening, just present. Whispers followed them down the lockers. Phones slipped out of pockets. A few laughs bubbled up and died just as quickly. There was nothing to push against. No posturing. No reaction to provoke. That unsettled people more than shouting ever could. The principal listened more carefully that day. Papers that had been stamped and shelved were pulled back out. Policies were suddenly less rigid than they'd been the week before. The word liability gave way to responsibility in conversations that had always favored the former. The bullies noticed last. They noticed when jokes stopped landing, when the laughter they were used to leaned away instead of in. They noticed when four motorcycles idled quietly outside the school gates one afternoon. Engines low, respectful, lined up with care. No revving, no stairs. Just waiting. No one told them to stop. They just did. A social worker came the following week. Then another. Forms were filled out. Questions asked the right way. This time, there was a case review, scheduled and rescheduled, suddenly treated with urgency. Phone calls were returned. Emails answered. Mara answered questions she'd already answered before. But this time someone took notes. She still wore the repaired helmet when she walked places with them. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. It reminded her that things could be broken and still matter. Then came the court date. It wasn't dramatic. No cameras waiting outside. No crowd gathering for spectacle. Just a gray building with glass doors and a security guard who looked up, then did a double take. The hallway outside the courtroom filled slowly, one man at first, then another, then more. Leather vests, folded hands, boots planted squarely on polished floors that had seen too much pacing, and not enough standing still. They didn't talk much. When they did, it was quiet, respectful. They leaned against walls or stood straight-backed, making room for people to pass. No one blocked the doors. No one asked them to leave. They stood like men who had nowhere else they needed to be. Mara arrived with her social worker, helmet tucked under her arm. She paused when she saw them, eyes widening slightly. Someone nodded to her, not solemn, not smiling, just acknowledgement. She nodded back. Inside the courtroom, the air was thin with routine. Papers shuffled. A judge glanced up, then again, eyes catching on the hallway beyond the open door. On the stillness, on the number of bodies occupying it without sound. Proceedings moved differently after that. Questions were asked carefully. Answers weren't rushed. Decisions weren't delayed. Someone took a photo from the far end of the hall. Then another. No faces front and center. Just a line of men standing quietly, waiting, while a small girl with a helmet stepped forward to speak. By the end of the day, the image was everywhere. Shared without commentary. Captioned and recaptioned. Interpreted 100 different ways. They called it the helmet hearing. And for the first time, the world didn't look away. Change didn't happen all at once. There was no single morning where everything felt different. No clear line between before and after. What changed came in pieces so small they were easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. It happened in early morning rides to school, when the streets were still half asleep and the sky hadn't decided what color it wanted to be yet. The motorcycle moved at a careful pace, engine humming low, steady. Mara wore the helmet every time. The crack had been sealed with silver resin, the line still visible if you looked for it, but smooth beneath her fingers. Not perfect, just whole. She learned how to lean with the turns, how to trust the stops, how to breathe when the light changed. At school, things were quieter now. Not easier, exactly, but less sharp. The helmet waited for her in the office on mornings, sat gently on a shelf behind the desk. No one questioned it anymore. Some things, once seen, couldn't be unseen. In the afternoons, homework happened at a scarred wooden table in the back of the shop. The surface was etched with years of use, burnt marks, knife lines, ink stains. Nothing precious, nothing fragile. Mara spread her papers out anyway, pencil tapping lightly as she worked through equations. Someone sat nearby, not hovering, not correcting unless asked. The radio played softly, tuned to something harmless. Eli started bringing coffee instead of liquor. It wasn't announced. No declarations. Just a thermos that showed up one morning and kept showing up after that. His hands shook a little less as the days passed. He stayed longer, left earlier, When Mara asked him why he drank so much coffee, he shrugged and said it helped him think. She accepted that in the shop, Mara learned how to tighten a bolt, then how to loosen one without stripping the thread, how to tell by sound when something was wrong before it was obvious. Grease found its way under her nails. She didn't mind. It made her feel useful, capable. Rook watched more than he spoke. When she asked questions, he answered them straight. When she made mistakes, he let them stand long enough for her to notice. He didn't rush in to fix things the way he used to with machines, with people. Listening turned out to be harder than solving problems. He practiced anyway. Sometimes Mara talked. Sometimes she did in single quotes T. Both were allowed. The helmet stayed with her. Sometimes on her head. Sometimes on the table beside her. Sometimes on the hook by the door. No one treated it like a relic. No one treated it like junk either. It was just their part of the room now. They stacked on top of each other. Nothing dramatic happened. No confrontations. No victories worth posting about. Just routines that held. Showing up meant rides even when it rained. It meant checking homework even when the day had been long. It meant noticing when Mara was quiet and not demanding an explanation. It meant Eli pouring coffee at noon instead of something stronger. It meant Rook learning that silence wasn't something to fill, it was something to respect. Again and again. Weeks passed. Then months. The shop didn't soften. It didn't need to. It made space. And in that space, change took root, not loudly, not all at once, but steadily. The kind that lasts because no one is watching when it happens. At Mara's 8th grade graduation, the gym was too bright and too loud. The kind of brightness that flattened everything into the same washed-out color. Folding chairs scraped against the floor. Programs rustled. Someone's phone chimed and was hastily silenced. The air smelled like floor polish and nerves. Mara stood with the other students in a crooked line along the bleachers, cap too big, gown brushing her ankles. She felt the weight of the helmet under her arm, solid and familiar. It didn't belong here. That was the point. When her name was called, applause rose and fell like a wave she had to step into alone. Her shoes squeaked as she crossed the gym floor. Halfway to the stage, she nearly turned back. Then she tightened her grip on the helmet and kept walking. The principal smiled in the practice way adults do when they think they understand what's about to happen. He handed her the diploma folder. She nodded, then didn't step aside. "I'd like to say something," she said. A pause, a glance, then a nod. The microphone was set to high. She reached up, adjusted it, hands steady. For a moment, she said nothing. She scanned the crowd, instead parents with cameras raised, teachers with tired smiles, students trying not to look bored. Then her eyes found the back row. They didn't sit together. They never did. Leather vests stood out among pressed shirts and summer dresses, impossible to miss. Rook was there, hands folded, posture relaxed in a way that still suggested readiness. Eli stood nearby, coffee cup tucked under his arm, eyes fixed on the stage. Mara inhaled. "My dad taught me that protection isn't about never getting hurt," she said. Her voice carried better than she expected. "It's about who stands between you and the road when you fall." The gym quieted. Programs stopped rustling. A few heads tilted, listening. "He rode every day," she continued, "not because it was easy, but because it made him feel alive. He told me that a helmet isn't a promise, it's a chance to walk away, a chance for someone else to keep going." She lifted the helmet slightly. The silver seam caught the light. "This helmet broke once," she said. "So did I." Her throat tightened. She let it. The silence held. "But both can be rebuilt," she finished. "If someone decides you're worth stopping for." She looked straight at Rook then. Not long, not pleading, just enough. He didn't nod, didn't smile. He didn't need to. The understanding was already there. For a heartbeat. No one moved. Then someone stood. A teacher first, then a parent, then another. Chairs scraped back. Applause rose, not sharp or explosive, but steady like something finally set right. Mara stepped back from the microphone, pulse racing. She accepted the diploma this time and walked off the stage, legs trembling, heart full in a way that scared her a little. As she passed the back row, Rook didn't reach out. He didn't have to. His eyes met hers, and that was enough. The helmet stayed under her arm as she returned to her seat. Full circle didn't mean going back. It meant knowing exactly where you'd been and choosing where you stood now. The helmet sits today on a shelf above the main workbench, where the light hits it just right in the late afternoon. The crack that once split the crown has been sealed with silver resin, not hidden, not sanded smooth. It catches the eye because it refuses to pretend nothing happened. A scar made visible on purpose. Beneath it hangs a small patch stitched onto a scrap of worn leather. Customers notice it as they wait leaning against the counter, hands smelling of gasoline and rubber, eyes wandering the walls the way they always do. They ask about the bikes first, then the tools. Eventually, almost without fail, they ask about the helmet. Rook never gives them the story. He'll glance up once, follow their gaze, and tap the visor with one knuckle. A soft, hollow sound. That's all. Then he goes back to work tightening a bolt, wiping his hands on a rag, focusing on the task in front of him. If someone presses, he doesn't push back. He just doesn't add anything. The shop has changed. Though no one could point to the exact moment it happened, there's an extra chair now, tucked against the wall. A coffee pot that's always on, even late. A box of mismatched helmets by the door donations, mostly left quietly, no names attached. The men still argue, still swear, still carry their old weight. But the edges have softened in places that matter. Ellie's been sober 18 months. He doesn't announce it. He just shows up early and leaves late, coffee in hand, steady as the clock on the wall. Mara stops by sometimes after school. Not every day, not like before. She doesn't need to. When she does, she helps clean parts or sits on the stool by the bench, homework spread out, helmet resting at her feet. She's taller now, louder, more sure of herself. She doesn't look at the shelf when she comes in. She doesn't have to. Protection, she learned, isn't something you keep in glass. It's something you practice. Rook watches her without hovering. He's learned where to stand, close enough to matter, far enough to let her choose her own footing. When she leaves, he listens to the sound of her bike fade down the street, not out of fear, but out of habit, the same way you listen for the click of a door locking behind someone you care about. The world never stopped being dangerous. Trucks still run lights, bills still come due, loss still arrives without asking permission, but some things remain. A shop where a kid once walked in holding the last piece of her father and wasn't turned away. A helmet that did what it was built to do. Men who decided that strength wasn't measured by how little you feel but by how much you're willing to carry. So when people ask what the patch means, Rook doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. It means this. If a child shows up holding something broken, you don't decide whether it's worth saving. You decide whether they are. You pull up a chair. You make room. You stay. Because protection doesn't start with armor. It starts with presence. So here's the question that lingers long after the shop door closes and the engines go quiet. What would you do if a child showed up holding the last piece of someone they loved? Be someone who shows up.